everyone. Very excited to see everyone. We are really excited here at NextGen to be hosting this incredible live stream about the power of the Latino vote with some of the most incredible and powerful Latino women leading social justice and progressive work for the Latino community in the country. Um, and I am excited to be able to connect with all of you about this work and the work also that NextGen is doing this election. So we are going to be having with us, here they are joining us from across the country. And I'm excited to get to connect with them. Again, I used to see you all in person a lot more before COVID. But my name is Cristina Tzintzún Ramirez, and I am the president of NextGen America, the country's largest youth voting rights organization. And of course, when we talk about the Latino community, you can't not talk about the youth vote as well, right? That we are a huge part of this country. I live in Texas, where we are now the largest ethnic group from the new census. But the new census just showed the power of the Latino community. And we talk about the Latino community, we also have to talk about young people, because as you all know, that across the country, the most common age for a white American is 55. For an African American, it's 27. And for a Latino, it's age 11 in the United States. So that's why at NextGen, the Latino vote is so important to us. And I'm excited to be able to talk to you all. So let me introduce our panel of incredible chingonas for Hispanic Heritage Month and the conversation that we're going to be having. Women that I look up to and that are tremendous, tremendous leaders for our community. And if you don't follow them already, you have to follow them and their organizations, because they will keep you informed, politically aware, and motivated to keep doing this work. So first, I want to introduce Greisa Martinez Rosas, my fellow Tejana, who leads one of the most, that's right, I wish there was like music, like favorite theme songs, but one of the most powerful mujeres leading this work across the country. She leads United We Dream, the country's largest immigrant youth-led organization. And of course, United We Dream helped win the DREAM Act that transformed the lives of hundreds of thousands of young people, especially a lot of young Latinos across the country. And their work has just, proved that when young people in our community organizes, we can win, even when it seems insurmountable. So we'll talk a little bit more about their work. And then, of course, Yadira Sanchez, who is the co-founder and currently serves as the director of Poder Latinx, a political powerhouse and home for Latinos that's really lifting up the power of the Latino community. And Yadira and I got to meet a few years ago. We actually were like switching offices at SEIU. I don't know if you remember that, Yadira, when she was at Mi Familia Vota, where she helped raise over $20 million to invest in the Latino community and the power of our vote. So she's been in this work. She looks young, but she's been in this work longer. And she has tremendous wisdom to share with us about how to build political power for the Latino community. And then we have Maria Isabel Franco Quinonez, who is the research manager at X Lab. So X is an organization that's just a few years old, but has really been on the frontier of building the research and messaging for people to understand the Latino community. I think people oftentimes, especially in politics, treat us like we're unicorns, and you all break that down for people and let them know what are the trends, who are we, what are we up against, and what speaks to us to move us. So really proud to be able to be doing this with just three incredible women, Latino women, leading social change in our country. So it's Hispanic Heritage Month. And before we dig in, I wanted to ask you, what is something that makes you incredibly proud to be Latina this month, or that you really try and celebrate? Obviously, you celebrate it all year round because you live it, but something that you really try and uplift. And I'll start for me, it's really, for me, it's always a reminder of the fact that my Mexican family, we grew up really poor. I say we grew up economically poor, but culturally rich. And so I try and share that rich culture with my son, especially all year round, but especially this month, where we talk about where we're from and the love of community that we have. And I always think about the most humble people I've worked with have always been the most generous. And for me, that's something that I take of deep pride as a Latina, as immigrant kid, something that I really hold dear in our community is that we really do believe in sharing and caring for one another, and that translates across communities. And again, always the most poor, humble people I have found to always be the most generous. So, Greisa?
Oh wow, that's such a beautiful question. I'm glad that you're asking it to ground us in this space. So I one of the things that I celebrate all year round, especially this month, is the spiritual practices that have come from our indigeneity that ground us, even if we don't know how to name them or like how, where they came from. I know that my mom used to talk about like darse baños de luz de luna, like to go outside and just like bask in the light of the moon. And it wasn't until maybe a month, like a year ago, that I learned that from our Otomi culture, like the moon is like a guiding light for us. And so it reminds me of the magic that exists in us, sometimes very deep, 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 but always, always present. And that comes from an understanding that we were nation states before, that we have indigenous people in our bloodstream that are like grounding us as we move forward in this the next couple of years and in our work.
I love that. Yadira?
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me first, Cristina, and thank you to your team for putting this webinar together. Greatly appreciate us uplifting Hispanic Heritage Month together. I would say that I really enjoy, like we, like you, celebrate being Latina year round because we are, and our cultures, our traditions. But I really enjoy during this month learning more about unsung heroes because we have so many great um, heroes that have done so many great things for our society, for the U.S. and they're often not heard about. And I think this month, I love it when folks do research and dig deeper of how a Latina or Latino or Latinx folks contributed to our country and our society, making it amazing. So I just get a lot of pride, and I enjoy just hearing those stories.
Maria Isabel?
Just as Yadira was saying, wanted to start off by saying thank you so much to you and to the NextGen team for bringing us together this month. It's really incredibly special. Yeah, definitely celebrating being a Latina all year round and all of our lives. I moved to the US from Venezuela when I was very young. And so I think that Hispanic Heritage Month has always served as an opportunity for me to just be able to, share like what my family and I have done our whole lives with friends and with coworkers. And I think, to be honest, working at Ekis recently has been really special because it's the first time where, Hispanic Heritage Month at my workplace is not the first time that we are celebrating the Latinos on the team. And so it's been really special to be able to sharing what we have been doing in terms of food, share jokes, the good ones and the ones that talk about, those months where Hispanic Heritage Month has been maybe the first time at a workplace where folks were really focusing on the importance of our people. And it's been really incredible to be able to just share with folks from other countries, with folks who were born here, who were born in other countries, and be able to just get a sense of what this has looked like for other folks on my team for all of the time that they've been in the U.S.
So I would love to start while we talk about like honoring our culture, also breaking down, I think, some of the misconceptions about our community. So we all are leaders in progressive organizations, right? And I think there's a lot of misconceptions, especially being here in Texas. People always ask me, are Latinos Democrats or Republicans? And I say, we're neither, we're poor. And we do vote overwhelmingly for progressives, but it really depends who speaks to us in our power and our pain and understands that and reaches out to us. So I would love, and especially young Latinos, we are overwhelmingly progressive, right? And then when we get into to what we care about and what drives us, the Latino community, the number one that cares about, that is willing to also make economic sacrifices to tackle the climate crisis. I think that always surprises people, that the Latino community, young Latinos, are actually the most queer ethnic group in the younger generation of any ethnic group that self-identify as queer, that young Latinos also are big economic populists, that they want to raise the minimum wage, that they want healthcare for everyone, that they want public education fully funded. And I think these ideas surprise people that don't know about our community. But I would love to just start with, for you all, one, I want to know how you each got into this work, because I think a lot of young Latinos don't even know that this is like a job or a pathway in our community to make change. And so one, how did you get into this work? What advice do you have for other younger Latinos? And then let's get into those misconceptions that people have about our community. So why don't we start with Yadira?
Yeah. Well, let me see. How did I started doing this work? It definitely was not planned. I didn't go to college wanting to be an executive director of a civic and social justice organization. One thing led to another. Once I got involved in the immigrant rights movement, I really knew that I had to continue advocating for our community. I was in labor. I was really called upon to just serving our Latino community in a more civic social justice space, which was what kind of brought forth Poder Latinx as an idea with my group of colleagues, to found something that was very much focused for our community and the next generation of Latinx. So I would say it wasn't intentional, which is what really also sparked me to create the Poderosa Fellowship, which is a fellowship really geared at Latinas, especially young Latinas that are still in school, or the Latinas that are not going that track, to really think of ourselves as civic leaders, because we are. Look at you, Cristina, look at you, Greisa, look at all of us here. You are civic leaders, you are, like you said, chingonas, definitely. But we need to see ourselves at a younger age. It can be, one job led to the other that brought us into the space. It has to be intentional, and we have to bring as many other Latinas behind us into the space, because it's very much needed. So that's what I would say. Like, it wasn't a very linear path, I would say, but I'm really glad I'm here, and I'm really glad that we're bringing more Latinas along.
And Maria Isabel, are you there?
Yes, I am here.
Great. And for you, Maria Isabel, how did you get involved into this work and this role that you're in?
Yeah, so similar to Yadira, it definitely was not part of a master plan and was not super linear. But I think that, growing up in the US, having moved here at a young age, I always sort of got to see the differences in just the ways in which my parents were able to engage with politics in this country, my family, friends, etc. And once I got my first opportunity to be an organizer, it was again a little random, but I was able to see the ways in which being able to speak Spanish and speak English allowed me to connect with so many people who otherwise may have not been connected with. And that also allowed me to understand how different organizing programs were prioritizing ensuring that folks were being spoken to and connected with in ways that actually resonated with them, and the ways in which those kinds of decisions around, in language content and communication were being made. And I think because of the ways in which a lot of folks prioritize making those decisions with, lots of data and the importance of data-backed decisions, I sort of found myself wanting to get more involved in the research and data space, which is definitely not dominated by Latina women or anything near it. And so, just getting to have a seat at that table and getting to sort of make sure that that space has all of the voices that are needed in it as well, was how I sort of ended up in the Latino voter research space specifically.
And Greisa, how about you? How did you get involved in this work?
First, I want to say that I'm really excited that so many people are joining this conversation online. On behalf of the 1.2 million members of United We Dream, I want to bring greetings. And for me, I'm undocumented, unafraid, queer, and unashamed. I grew up in a Southern Baptist home in Dallas, Texas. And I always was deeply ashamed of being undocumented. I was deeply in the closet, of not even allowing myself to ask myself the questions. And always, I think, with the pressure of feeling like my parents and I sacrificed so much to be in this country. I remember crossing the Rio Grande when I was 7 years old, and how difficult and terrifying that experience was. And everything that I did was in service of making that sacrifice worth it. And when I found movement, when I found United We Dream, it was because I was at my lowest point. My dad had just been deported from in a matter of weeks. I felt responsible, I didn't do enough to stop his deportation, didn't know enough to do it. And I found this political home of young, queer, badass organizers from all across the country that said, not only do we deserve the right to be in this country, not only do we deserve the right to have citizenship, but we also deserve the opportunity to be unapologetically who we are. And so, for me, to know me is to also know my people, and my people are queer. My people are les gusta el chile. They love spicy food. My people love to go out late nights after organizing, to go out to the clubs and dance it all out. And, I think that everyone is going to find the pathway in front of them, as long as you are grounded in the belief that you deserve more than what you have right now, and that you deserve to be able to have a big enough imagination to construct the life that you deserve and the one that your family deserves. So that's a bit about me. And I'm really, sometimes I'm in disbelief that this is my life, that I get to wake up and have conversations like the one that we're having today, Cristina, that I get to organize with the most strategic, compassionate, beautiful people in the game, which is in my team and in the members of UWD, and also the people that are on this call. So excited to dig in.
Well, I love that about fighting for what we deserve. I too came to this work from the immigrants' rights work on the labor side, organizing undocumented workers in Texas, and just seeing the conditions that our community faced and understanding, while we were able to actually achieve a lot to raise wages and conditions for construction, mostly construction workers, because half of the workforce in our state is undocumented and 80% are Latino. That ultimately, if we were going to win, we also had to organize and build political power. Right. And that I think we were all driven to this work by love of community, and are still driven by this work for love of community. And that love means giving people the political power to win what they deserve, right? For all of us. So I'm wondering for you, if you could tell me, we're all doing this for love of community, love of winning what we deserve. Tell us how your organization does that. What is it that your organization does to build the political power and voice of Latinos? And then tell me the most common misconception that you get about our community or the work that you do, and what's the actual truth. So why don't we start with Yadira?
Yeah. So our organization is a civic and social justice and nonprofit, and we are dedicated to building political power for the Latino community to win on economic, environmental, and immigrant justice. We know elections have consequences. We do a year-round integrated voter engagement strategy where we incorporate civic engagement, issue-based campaigns on economic, environmental, and immigrant justice, and leadership development, like the Poderosa Fellowship. It's an integrated voter engagement strategy because that's what we need. We need year-round engagement. It's not about one election. It's about all elections. It's about changing the our community's political consciousness, because we need champions. We need to elect folks that are going to be fighting for our community, that are going to be fighting for our best interests and not working against us. As we've seen through history, elections and those in power have tremendous power over our families and the laws that get passed. And definitely a misconception we have is that Latinos don't. That's true. It's been very strategically made that way, intentionally, I would say, made that way, made it harder for our folks to engage in the democratic process, which is why my organization, Poder Latinx, we work on facilitating the process year round, and make it easy for them to register. We make them easy to find access to the ballot box, to make it culturally and linguistically comfortable for them. We do a lot of work with Univision and Spanish media because we know that Spanish monolingual voters get left out. Low propensity, new voters, they're not on the top of the list of many candidates and parties. And those are the folks that we reach out to because we know if they're engaged, if they're informed, our community will go out and vote. But there are many barriers that, that's part of our mission, facilitating the process and making it easier.
And Maria Isabel, since you do research, and obviously you have been researching trends, there's so many misconceptions out there. Tell us what the data really says. Tell us what you do, but then tell us what the data really says versus what people think based on anecdotes, but not data.
Thank you for teeing up that question. I really appreciate it. So yeah, Eki's, what we're doing with the research is really trying to fill in those gaps of understanding that, are so often because of the lack of resources that have been directed toward researching our community. And I think that, to your point, one of the biggest misconceptions today is what so many headlines are focused on, this idea that Latino voters are fleeing towards Republicans, that Latino voters feel as though their values align more with Republicans and Republican candidates. And I think that, to start, there's the obvious point that Latino voters are not a monolith, which we discussed, that there are nuances and differences among Latino voters that can't be overlooked, but that we shouldn't, then go to say that Latino voters are not a group, that Latinos are not a group in this country who have some shared values, who have some shared experiences that, can impact the ways in which they engage with the political environment. And so, I think that when we answer this question and address this repetitive headline about erosion in democratic support among Latino voters, we go back to 2020 to look a bit at what we do have some more data on. And in 2020, we saw shifts that really showed the way that Latinos, while not a monolith, are a group. We saw a shift toward Trump in 2020 that cut across geographic regions, it cut across country of origin, it cut across a lot of the kinds of groupings that do add nuance to who Latino voters are. And what a lot of people, I think, are trying to figure out right now is whether that shift is going to rebound, is going to get worse. And a lot of these headlines are making it seem as though that shift is getting worse. But in all of our research that we have been doing throughout the entire cycle, really trying to get at this question, we're just not seeing that. We're not seeing, those shifts that we had seen back in 2020 continue to get worse, with Latino voters continuing to shift towards the Republican Party. We don't see evidence of things getting a lot better yet. We don't see evidence of a major bounce back that I think many would like to see, but we're not seeing that that alarming shift that I think a lot of the headlines we've been seeing have been calling out. And so I think it's important to understand, also to Yadira's point from earlier, that when we're talking about the Latino electorate and we're talking about the percentage of Latinos who are voting, that the percentage who have not yet also play a huge role in what that swing can look like from election to election. It's a growing electorate, growing both in proportion of the electorate overall and in turnout rates in general. And so, focusing on this shift that we just have not been able to see in our research, in our polling, in our focus groups, and so on, doesn't feel like a fair representation. And so I think a big part of our work is in helping to shape that narrative and making sure that that narrative is being shaped by folks like us who are doing the research for our community.
Yeah, and but I would just add, it was amazing to me after the 2020 election that Arizona flipped. And it flipped because of 10 years of organizing from folks like United We Dreams, Poder Latinx, the grassroots community organizing that happened in the Latino community and built the political power to shift the entire state over 10 years. And we had so many less stories about that than we had about a few counties in South Texas, when 75% of the Latino population actually lives in the big metros and voted overwhelmingly Democratic. That for me, the story, and by the way, who won the South Texas during the Democratic primary was Bernie Sanders, because guess what? He spent time and money talking to Latino voters. So to me, the real story is, guess what? There is a portion of the Latino electorate that, yes, is up for grabs. And if you don't like it, why aren't you funding Poder Latinx? Why aren't you funding X? Why aren't you funding NextGen? Why aren't you funding United We Dream? Because that's actually what wins in our community. So let's turn it over to United We Dream, who had done a lot of work in Arizona, and can tell us too just about what you all do and the misconceptions that you all face.
Well, I think to talk about Arizona, as you know, Cristina, is to talk about the work that Poder Yadira and Poder Latinx, that Alex and Tomas at Lucha have done, and many, many others for decades have done here in the state. And I think it's also to tell the story about how community organizing that is grounded in the long-term vision, that sees electoral politics as one way to express power, like how important that is to our overall strategy and our work. And so at United We Dream, we are the largest immigrant youth-led network in the country. We have a C4, United We Dream Action, a PAC, a United We Dream Action PAC, because we believe that it's important to build an independent political power block in this country that is led by young people. And so you mentioned, Cristina, Bernie Sanders. A lot of that campaign was powered by young people that have been super clear that the status quo that exists right now no longer works for the challenges that we see up ahead and the ones that we're facing already. Because of young people, we elected Joe Biden into office and got rid of Donald Trump, which was a historic intervention that has shaped the last 4 years and will continue to shape the decade. We got rid of fascism from the White House because we were clear about what our communities were up against. And so at UWD, we use narrative and storytelling broadly to be able to change hearts and minds and political attitudes. We use community organizing in places like Texas, Arizona, Florida, the DMV to build community power. And we use our platform that reaches 5 million people every single month to fight disinformation, which we know that like the far right is using every day. X has amazing research around this, that the way in which our communities have been targeted by white supremacists that do not have the best intentions for us, by misinformation and disinformation, which is what we do at UWD. I'll say that, like, I think one of the misconceptions that I've really had to like fight within myself is that as an immigrant, sometimes I feel like I'm coming in new, like we're like a rising majority, like we're like in it. But the reality is that Latinos, especially Mexican immigrants, have been in this country for centuries and generations, that we have shaped the political future of this country, and that we are not new or newcomers, and so that we know that history tells us that Mexican migrants were lynched in the South Texas during the 60s and the 50s. We know that people often reference the farm worker movement, which is important and necessary, but there's also been people and women that, like Carmelita Torres, that started the revolt around the borders. It was young people that ensured that we continue to call out what I do think is like one of the most pressing and important understandings of the political moment, that we are fighting the rise of white supremacy and fascism. And that though, yes, we make sense of this moment by issues, right? Like I talk about migration, people talk about access to healthcare, economic equality and opportunity. What all of these things are like systems that have been built to exclude and exploit us. And that is where we find more power with Black people in this country, with Indigenous communities here, Asian Americans, that we actually have an understanding that we are in a moment where saving our democracy is important, but it's not enough. That we have to win the argument that people of color, the queer people, the women, that we deserve the right to live and to have bodily autonomy and to make choices about ourselves. And so when we think about the elections, whether it's the midterms, whether it's 2024 and beyond, they're not really about the issues that like people want to put on the ballot box. It's really about deciding what kind of country we want to build together in this moment and making a very precise calculation on how we do that. And one of those ways is by exerting our civic engagement power. And for people like myself, I've never had the opportunity to vote. I'm undocumented. But I know that the millions of people that I represent, though we can't cast a vote, we do have power and agency and can move others to be able to create the future that we all deserve.
I think what you spoke about is so critical, right? And also what Maria Isabel said about we're not a monolith, right? I think as a community, a Latino community, I think especially being in Texas, we are a community that where many of us are newly arrived to this country, but we live in a duality where we have also been in these lands before this country was even the United States. And so we straddle both of those spaces in our community, which I think brings us to like, okay, so if we are both have been here forever, right? And at the same time, many of us are new, and we have Venezuela, we have Puerto Rico, we have Mexico, like, what are the cultural things that bind us, and how do you do outreach to a community that has some of these cultural shared characteristics but also really different? So why don't we start with you, Maria? Like, what are your tips to people about, like, okay, the Latino community isn't a monolith, but what does bind the Latino community, and how do you do good, smart outreach to the Latino community?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I will, to rep the research side of the panel, I will start with something that I think comes before we're even delivering those messages and making sure that our communications and our organizing efforts are culturally competent, which is how are we finding Latinos and figuring out how to speak with them. There are so many tools that our different organizations use to be able to make sure that we are reaching out to the folks we want to reach out to. And not all of those tools have been made to perfectly capture the Latino community in the United States in all of its nuances. And so, those tools simultaneously allow us to do that work, but have blind spots. And so figuring out what those blind spots are, figuring out how to use as much information as we can get our hands on to make sure that we are reaching out to not just the folks who vote every year, but the folks who maybe haven't voted before, and so on and so forth, and might not be on the tops of those lists, and making sure that we're able to accurately target who it is that we want to target, which is all of our people, not just some. So figuring out how to call attention to those blind spots, work on improving the different tools that we use for our organizing and campaign efforts, and then figuring out what it is that we can use to supplement those tools while we're working on fixing them, is a really important kind of baseline step, I think, that we have been working on a lot at ECIS, and trying to figure out how to best share some of those tips with the folks who are on the ground doing outreach work. And then I think the next one, which is always feels obvious and always feels like tough to even have to mention, but anything around Spanish language content and making sure that it is being created by and delivered to the right folks is a really top priority. I think a lot of people who have worked in this space have been asked to translate a random thing for an organization. I know I got some smiles there from Greisa and from Yadira, and I think we all have our
I was
different.
like, I translate pocha if you want.
Yeah, I'm like, we've all had to, we've all been, many of us have been kind of put in situations where we've been expected to, be Spanish language experts, and not all of us are. But our folks deserve to be receiving content that is made professionally and made in a culturally competent way. And so I think another thing that we've been pushing our folks as much as possible as it comes to the content creation side is just making sure that the content creation captures those nuances, that we understand what it means to translate something for los venezolanos en Florida, los mexicanos en California, and so on and so forth, so that we can really capture the differences in our folks and in the communications that we need to be receiving, and that work is being, not just pushed by Latino-led organizations, but also by organizations that are not Latino-led. That work can't all just fall on Latino-led organizations, because everybody has the responsibility to be doing that work accurately, professionally, and in a culturally competent way.
Yadira, what's your
Yeah.
answer?
I definitely would say having a culturally and linguistically approach to our community and the diversity we have within our own community. We always talk about not being a monolith, but yet we set campaigns and slogans and and the whole communication strategy, just one size fits all. And something that we have noticed, we obviously know certain strategies work. Like we know canvassing, for example, we have over 100 canvassers right now registering our community. They registered 20,000, over 20,000, 21,000 up to date. And when we talk to the community, how do we engage? Even in Spanish, right? We know certain words are very common in certain cultures versus other communities. So we make sure we tailor the cultural activations, for example, very unique to the place. Like we might have a certain type of music in Orlando versus Phoenix, based on the community we're trying to speak. We also, during the pandemic, our organization really took obviously a very different approach, because all our field had to be remote. Just over the course of a weekend, we just transitioned to remote, and we were, in the crisis mode, we got creative and innovative, and that's where we came up with a lot of very unique and innovative campaigns, like a virtual art gallery, who won a Poly Award, and it was engaging with local artists, using their art as a form of engagement, of political engagement with our community, promoting them to register, promoting them to go out and vote early. We also did our voter drag squad in Arizona that now has led to us, our Drag y Vota campaign that's nationally partnering with the drag community in the States and using their voices to engage Latinx youth voters, to make sure that we're reaching the community, our diversity again, with the right messengers, with folks that are trusted in those communities. Also music, we partner with Las Cafeteras. We collaborated on 2 music videos using their music as PSAs, and we're promoting going dancing to the polls, like a fiesta, like how it's very common in Latin America. Voting is a celebration of our democracy, so they're used to having parties, being festive. Also with La Borinqueña, we did a webcomic where we use animation and voices like Rosario Dawson to really engage our community. Specifically, was very much tailored to Puerto Ricans in Florida, but we also noticed it was very popular with the youth. So we definitely expanded that reach. Again, looking at analytics, when it was performing, with what audience it was reaching, and El Poder de Tu Salud, which is another campaign that's very geared with our health community, engaging doctors to be civically engaged as well with their patients. They're prescribing voting as their recipe, as their medicine for better healthcare. So it's really tailoring certain campaigns to specific constituencies. Again, in the language, we do a lot of bilingual content. It's not just Spanish, it's not their English, because we know there are Latinos that don't speak Spanish, and there's Latinos that don't speak English. So making sure we're tailoring very unique campaigns to the right audience to reach our community that we want to, we want to engage them all, but we want to be very unique in how we engage each segment.
And Greisa, how do you all do it?
Well, United We Dream, we believe that those closest to the pain are also closest to the solutions, the innovations, and the breakthrough. So whenever we think about any campaign, we put our people at the center of decision-making, of tactical decisions, and of like making choices along the way in the campaigns. I feel really proud to have like a team that like is really grounded in our membership and what is the thing that would speak to folks. And so some of the tactics that Yadira spoke to are things that we've put into place. I know that in the we know that like it is important to lead with integrity and authenticity. The reality is that like our people, Latinos, immigrants, Black and Brown people, women, there is a feeling of, I wanted this to be better. I wanted this moment right now. Like for undocumented folks like myself, we thought that by this point we would have a pathway to citizenship for people. And there's a conversation happening all across the country right now about, there's some disregard in some ways about the power of our vote, about how responsive Democrats as a party are to the needs of our communities. And it's important to be able to hold both the tension of that and like the reality that has an impact on people's lives, and to what Yadira just named, that voting and being civically engaged is one way in which we like advance our vision and what we want of the world, but it's not the only way. And that's why I think that organizations like the ones representing on this call are so important, because I think we can be honest that there are many ways in which Latino communities have been disinvested from by both like political parties as well as like local and like political infrastructure. And what we are doing is ensuring that infrastructure is actually accountable to those folks, is like in conversation with people, changing as necessary, and being able to like have the ability to move in a culturally and integrity responsible way. So United We Dream just wrapped up our C3 civic engagement work, where we reached 1.2 million young people in the states of Texas and Florida. And in those conversations, we heard people talk about Roe v. Wade and the impact that would have on the ways that our communities will vote and the access to abortion. People talked about what's happening right now with Governor Abbott and DeSantis shipping and using our people as literal pawns in a political game, and how that is both distressing but also activating for our folks. And so I'm excited about what's to come. I'm excited about the power that's on this panel, but most importantly, the people that we represent, like the staff and the members that like are not on this little four squares, but that like are every day waking up and doing the work that's accountable to our vision and to our people.
So one of the things that I wanted to, I know we're just going to come to our last bit of time together, but is to talk a little bit about, the Latino community. I think we would all agree that demographics are not destiny, right? I think that, you just said, Greisa, that we're trying to push for greater investment in our communities as well. Then when we talked about what we deserve, I think there's also the reality that our organizations are doing outsized amount of work for the size and scale of our population, and that we're progressives, but we also know that we need to keep pushing the Democratic Party to invest greater in our current power and our potential power. And of course, we are part of a long tradition of Latinos organizing for political power, whether it's the Southwest Voter Project or LULAC or the history of the GI Forum or many, many others that came before us. But while demographics are not destiny, there is also, I say it's like demographics are not destiny. It's just a core ingredient in the recipe for change. And it's up to us to actually like bring it all together and make that meal, make that feast for our community. And so, I'm in Texas. You're in Arizona, Greisa. Arizona's changed. That political power came from the Latino community. Half of those turning 18 in Texas are Latino right now. Half. And 95% of them are US citizens, like already eligible to vote. This is the biggest battleground state in the country. That who's going to own transformative power for the future are young Latinos, but we've got to invest in them so that they can exercise it. So obviously people can contribute to your all's organizations, but I'm wondering too, what are ways that people can help with sweat equity and muscle to volunteer with your organization? And I know Maria Isabel's organization does research, so people should just give them money so they can keep doing great research. But Yadira and Greisa, how can people support your organizations if they want to volunteer?
I can go first. Go ahead. Okay, so definitely I would say we are 6 weeks away from, is it 6 or 7? We're 7 weeks away from election day, and we definitely have active canvassing teams, so definitely volunteer. If you're in those states, go to poderlatinx.org, join the movement, and there's a lot of volunteer opportunities in Arizona and Florida and Georgia, and virtually we can do phone banks, we could do text banks, so there's many ways for you to get involved and engage in a campaign this cycle. And obviously our issue advocacy campaigns, those are we're in for the long haul until we win on those issues. So definitely also getting involved in the issue-based campaigns. And I would definitely say that resources are always tight. So if there is obviously time or donations, they're always welcome.
I'll say one is ensuring that you're texting squad SQUAD to 877-877. Well, you'll find many other ways in which you can get engaged, and you'll hear from Alex and Eva from my team creating moments where you can make phone calls and just squad up. And I know that they'll want me to say that there's a lot of really cool swag that you might be in your future if you join the squad. The second one I'll say is that we're as Cristina, thank you so much for your opening words. United We Dream and the immigrant youth movement has been an energizer for our movement, largely because of our victory of DACA. And what we know is that the DACA program is in grave danger. And so if you and your communities want to, ensure that you're checking in on your people, for people to know what's going to happen so that we can make some plans together. That's a big way in which you can engage. Joining our affiliates, you can go to our website, unitedwedream.org, to find one of the 112 affiliates across the states that you can be a part of and have an organizing home. And then the third thing I'll say is that one of the most important things that people can do right now is stay engaged. So whether it is that you join NextGen in their efforts, Poder Latinx, United We Dream, Lucha, any other organizations that are out there, it's going to be important for us to be able to build our resilience. A lot of this moment feels like a lot of grief and a lot of challenging moments. And what I want to remind us is that we come from ancestors that survived really challenging moments. And that one of the ways in which we will get through this together is by having a discipline of hope. And that hope is also something that realizes into actually pulling up your sleeves and not allowing for our opposition to pummel us into the ground, but actually join in the effort. So that would be my call to action. Have discipline of hope. Join us and the squad up and the squad by texting 877-877 and ensuring that we continue to support the leadership of the women on this call and the many others that we represent.
Well, I love that, the discipline of hope. I think that, it is Hispanic heritage, but our culture is beautiful. It is resilient. And it's amazing to me, just when we talk about also how do we win with our communities, just uplifting and being seen, right? To be seen for all of the beauty, all of the flavor that we bring to this country, right? That is our country. And so I couldn't think of a better way to celebrate Hispanic heritage than with 3 super chingonas which for those of you that don't speak Spanish means like fucking badass women, essentially, and in Mexican Spanish. But I really am grateful of expanding people's vocabulary. But thank you all so much for spending this time with us, because we know you're incredibly busy. And if you don't follow these organizations or follow these women, please do, because they are building transformative power, not just for the Latino community, but are saving democracy in our country. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Gracias.